Hi, I'm Cautex, and recently I was bored and asked people for suggestions on what they wanted me to talk about. One of those suggestions was to do some analysis to find and explain the best opener for Arms Warriors. So, let's do that. The format of this video is going to be highlighting how I went about trying to answer this question. So, if all you care about is knowing the results and don't care to know why it's the best or what I did to come to that conclusion, then skip to the end of the video. For the rest of you, let's get started. For the purposes of this analysis, I'm going to be defining the opener as being the first 5 global cooldowns of a pull. I did this because, first and foremost, I'm lazy, and also because the longer of a timescale that I'm looking at, the more complicated things get, because much more randomness will come into play. I figured that the first 5 global cooldowns would be sufficiently immune to things like needing to account for Technician procs, auto attack crits, Wind Fury procs, and so on and so forth. Now, whenever I'm looking at a question like this, I start by figuring out what I know, then what I need to know, and then also what I don't need to know. So let's do that. We know that arms warriors basically have 4 damage multipliers that they need to contend with at the start of a fight, which is Avatar being a 20% increase, Colossus Smash, which is a 30% increase, Deep Wounds, which for the purposes of this math, I would assume would be a 25% increase, which seemed reasonable given the state of my current gear, and then Rend, which increases crit damage by 10%. During our opener, we're going to be looking to activate all of these multipliers, but because most of them are on the GCD, that means that we can't do all of them at the exact same time, and so we're going to need to do them in some order. Also, because these effects have different durations and also different amounts that they modify damage by, that means that not only are we going to have to do things in a sequence, but the order of that sequence matters. Okay, so what do we need to know in order to figure out what order is best? The first obvious thing that we need to do is figure out how much damage each ability does. We're also going to need to know our crit chance. Now, I'm going to try to avoid having to use haste and account for haste on everything, but there's a couple of scenarios where I'm likely going to have to need to use haste. So if I'm going to have to use haste, then I'm going to assume that my global cooldown is going to be 1.25 seconds, which is around 20% haste. This seems pretty conservative given the fact that on the opener is likely when you're going to have lust, but personally I would rather underestimate the value of things rather than overestimate the value. Alright, now lastly, what don't we need to know? There's a lot of variables that we could account for to make the modeling more accurate, but in reality, all we need to do is determine if one opener is better than the other. That means that anything that would work the exact same way for any of the sequences for the entirety of that sequence, then we don't have to care about it because it's going to work the same and have the same impact on all of the sequences that we're going to analyze. So for example, we don't need to model melee swings because they're going to be occurring at a constant rate throughout the opener. Sure, modeling them could certainly help accentuate the differences in the orders, but they're not unlikely to change the outcome of the math. So we can just kind of put those aside, and if it really comes down to small differences, then it might be reasonable to consider analyzing melee swings. Another thing is that regardless of the opener that we do, we're going to be applying deep wounds within a very short window of time, so there's not going to be much variance there, and so I chose not to account for deep wounds ticking damage. We also don't really have to care about trinket usage because they're off the global cooldown, and they're likely going to be used in the same way regardless of what opener we did. We also don't need to care about rage because during the opener, unless we get some misses or parries, we're never going to be rage starved during those first couple of abilities. Next, for the most part, we don't need to care about Mortal Combo or Enduring Blow because most of the possible openers that we will do are only going to use Mortal Strike once, so it's going to have the same benefit regardless of when specifically that Mortal Strike occurs. Now, there are a couple of sequences that do Mortal Strike twice. For that extra Mortal Strike, I will be accounting for Mortal Combo and also Enduring Blow because that is something that is different than all of the other sequences. So now that we have all these thoughts running in our head, we can finally start doing some math. But first, obviously, we're going to need to gather some baseline information about how hard our abilities hit. You could do this from scratch and calculate it based off of that ability's damage function, and then also your attack power and the armor of the target, but that's a lot of work, and it's also pretty easy to mess it up. So rather than doing that, I just went to a Raider's target dummy and started gathering data about how hard each ability was hitting when I didn't have any damage modifiers such as Sinful Revelation, or Deep Wounds, or Colossus Smash, or whatever. For abilities like Ancient Aftershock and Rend, I also made note of how hard the initial hit was, and then how much each tick was doing, as well as how often each tick occurred. Once I had all those numbers, it was time to pull up Excel. Here was my basic approach to how I was going to try to answer this question. Step 1, I was going to come up with a handful of opening sequences that seemed like they had the possibility of being good. My line of thinking was that I was going to look at when we were using Rend, when we do Colossus Smash, and when we do Mortal Strike, and then I would try to pick sequences that were various orderings of that. Then, starting from the baseline damage values that I collected, I would calculate the damage that the ability would hit for given the damage modifiers that would be active at that time, except for Ren because I haven't accounted for crit yet. While doing this, I would be paying close attention to how many ticks of Ancient Aftershock and Rend would be occurring during Colossus Smash. Then, once I did that, I could do step 3, which was to calculate the average damage of the ability after accounting for crit, and then also whether or not Rend was up. Now, Rend increases crit damage by 10%, which in-game means that the crit damage multiplier goes from 2 to 2.2. Note that the initial hit of Rend does not get this benefit, but all subsequent damage does. So I went ahead and did this for each ability in each of the sequences, and then I would add up all of the damage values that I got, and that would be the damage value of that opener. So when I've done this for all the sequences, I can rank order them, and then it's time to start doing what I believe to be the funnest part, and also something that usually ends up being the most time-consuming part, at least for me, and that's the act of figuring out why your model sucks, and then coming up with ways to make it suck less that don't involve starting over. And then once you've made your model suck a little bit less, and you get some new results, you'd look at those and you'd do the process again of figuring out why it sucks, and what you can do to make it suck even less. And then you keep going through this until you've removed enough suck to be happy with the results. So, well, let's do that. Once I had done that analysis that I just described, it was saying that the best opener to do was to use Avatar, then Colossus Smash, then Rend, then Ancient Aftershock, and then Overpower, and then Mortal Strike. Now, take a moment and think about that result. Can you spot the problem? The initial hit of Rend does a tiny amount of damage, which is why it's best practice to apply Rend before using Colossus Smash. But when you're looking at this small of a time frame, 30% of a tiny amount of damage is still better than just a tiny amount of damage. So clearly we need to fix this. Now, if you think about the duration of Colossus Smash as being a fixed number of global cooldowns, by applying Rend before Colossus Smash, that frees up a GCD where we can use some other ability. So how can we adjust the model in a way that will account for this? Now, again, because I'm lazy, I didn't want to have to extend the opening sequences to look at the entire duration of that Colossus Smash, because doing that would require me to account for haste and figure out exactly how many GCDs would land during the debuff, and then there would also be a lot of randomness associated with Tactician procs and so on and so forth. I just didn't want to do that. So I did some more looking at what the results were. And if you notice, the second best opener was using Rend before Colossus Smash. And that means that it just shifts the GCDs used during the debuff ahead to get used a little sooner. From this, I reasoned that each GCD is a sequence of steps, and since Colossus Smash is a set number of GCDs, any given GCD is going to either be affected by Colossus Smash or not be affected by Colossus Smash. And you can figure out if it is or isn't based off of the number of steps that have occurred since the Colossus Smash went out. By using Rend before Colossus Smash, that means that we just shift up the sequence a little sooner, which means that we're going to have now an extra GCD that is affected by Colossus Smash. So, what ability would that be? To keep things simple, I assumed that this GCD wouldn't be empty, and that you're going to use a Slam during it because that's the lowest damage ability that ARMS has, making it the worst case scenario aside from doing nothing, obviously. So what I did was, for all of the sequences that did Colossus Smash then Rend, I added the damage of a Slam that had Avatar, Rend, and Deep Wounds, but not Colossus Smash. Now, for sequences that did Rend before Colossus Smash, I added the damage of a Slam that had Colossus Smash, Avatar, Deep Wounds, and Rend. The next problem was that I have not yet accounted for the extra benefit that the double Mortal Strike opener gets from using Mortal Combo and Enduring Blow, relative to the other openers. So I had to account for that. Doing this was actually relatively straightforward. Now, since my Mortal Combo was at 17%, I basically calculated it so that there was an 83% chance of it doing the damage that it was showing currently, and then there was a 17% chance of it doing that damage twice. And when I did this, I also accounted for crit independently because Rend affects crit damage, and so that would actually matter. To deal with Enduring Blow, I just went and assumed that it added time to the current Colossus Smash debuff because I didn't want to have to redo my analysis just to account for maybe delaying a War Breaker if you get an Enduring Blow proc. Now, because that proc lasts for 6 seconds, I had to decide what would happen during those 6 seconds. This meant that I was unfortunately going to have to account for haste to know how many GCDs would land. Now, I went ahead and assumed that you would have around 20% haste, which puts your GCD at a nice even 1.25 seconds, which is pretty conservative considering the fact that you're likely going to have less during your opener, but whatever. So when you do this, it turns out that you're going to get 4.8 GCDs during that Enduring Blow proc, which you have to round down because there is no partial credit with this sort of thing. But I made a mental note of this because if you had more haste, then you would get a 5th GCD, which by extension would increase the value of this particular opener. Anyway, now I had to pick 4 GCDs that would be used during that proc. And given that these abilities would be occurring regardless of whether or not we're going to have an Enduring Blow proc, the damage provided by that proc is going to be 30% of the damage of all of the abilities that got done during that time. Rather than trying to mathematically model which abilities are most likely to be used during this time, what I did was I just sort of arbitrarily picked that you're going to have a Mortal Strike, you're going to have an Overpower, you're going to have a Slam, and then because of the fact that Rend would be falling off during this proc, I said that the fourth GCD would be you reapplying the Rend. It's certainly a bit of a debatable choice because, again, it's going to undervalue this opener, but because of how we're modeling this benefit, if all of the sequences spit out numbers that are really, really similar, that is, it's within maybe 700 to 1,000 damage, well, then I can go back and adjust my assumptions and then check it out that way and see if it's still better. I then had to do the tedious process of accounting for the fact that Mortal Combo can proc Enduring Blow, and so that means that there's lots of little different probabilities that I have to account for. All right, so now we've done that, and we've got all these adjusted values for our sequences, and then you rank order them again, and you see what the results are. Now, it's saying that the best opener is Avatar, then Rend, then Colossus Smash, then Ancient Aftershock, then Overpower, then Mortal Strike. So let's do the same thing again, and let's look at the result and think about whether or not this makes sense. Now, at this point, you might be like me and go, wait, couldn't we apply the same idea that we had about Rend before or after Colossus Smash to Avatar? To which the answer was,
oh shit, here we go again.
Well, let's think about it. Avatar is a bit different than Colossus Smash in that it can be used off the global cooldown, so basically you can use it right before a global cooldown finishes, and then you're going to get a fixed number of global cooldowns during its duration. Now, for a given GCD, whether or not Avatar is active is not really going to change your decision making about what ability gets used. So, long story short, yep, we can treat Avatar the same as CS. So that means that we need to account for that one global cooldown that either will or won't have Avatar for it, depending on whether or not you use it before Rend or after Rend right before the next ability. So for sequences that use Rend before Avatar, I added the damage of a Slam that was benefiting from Avatar in Deep Wounds, and then for sequences that used Avatar then Rend, I added the damage of a Slam that only benefited from Deep Wounds. The reason why I didn't account for Colossus Smash damage with this Rend was because of the fact that, well, Colossus Smash would be down naturally, so the only way you would get it is if you had an Enduring Blow proc, but we don't care about that because that's randomness and it doesn't change things. So after doing this again for all the sequences, I then rank order it with this new adjustment and have a look. Now, it's saying that the best order is to use Rend, then Avatar with Colossus Smash, then Ancient Aftershock, then Overpower, and Mortal Strike. And then at this point, I think, and I'm not coming up with anything that I need to account for that would meaningfully change the ordering of the openers, and the result doesn't seem too far-fetched, so here we are. Based on my analysis, it appears that the ideal opener is to use Rend, and then use Avatar and Colossus Smash together, and then Ancient Aftershock, then Overpower, then Mortal Strike, and after that you should go into your standard rotation. One thing to note is that while I have no actual numbers showing one way or the other, if you're Kyrian and are using Elysian Might, it's possible that it might be better to use Spear before Colossus Smash, since Elysian Might increases your crit damage. Now, my gut feeling says that Colossus Smash first would still be better in this case, but it's always possible for me to be wrong. As always, tell me why my opinions are dumb, what opening sequences I should have analyzed, and what mistakes I made. If any of the logical leaps that I made are confusing to you, then ask about it and I'll try to explain them better. Alternatively, you can always throw more suggestions at me for future videos. Lastly, I just want to say thank you for watching this video and subscribe for more.